We're looking at something really fascinating today. Those seemingly small, maybe even throwaway phrases that can just unexpectedly jolt our lives onto a completely different path.
Hmm.
You sent this really compelling collection of these moments, focusing on how the most ordinary words can sometimes carry this extraordinary weight.
Absolutely. And diving into the experiences you shared, it's really striking how diverse the circumstances are. Everything from the shock of sudden bad news delivered almost casually
Yeah.
to the subtle kind of creeping unease from maybe medical reassurances or even the chilling effect of innocent-sounding words that are actually masking betrayal.
And what seems to tie all these diverse examples together is just the profound impact of language itself. It really highlights how, well, fragile the course of our lives can be, maybe.
Definitely.
Like a single sentence acting as this completely unforeseen turning point. Our goal here, I think, is to understand that power, to really get a sense of how these seemingly light words can carry such significant consequences.
And given the personal and sometimes really sensitive nature of the stories you've shared, we absolutely want to assure everyone listening that we're approaching this with careful consideration.
Right.
These are real moments, real impacts, and we aim to explore them with the respect they deserve. So maybe let's start with those instances where utterly unexpected bad news arrives, wrapped in the most ordinary language.
It's almost surreal, isn't it? That
Yeah.
collision of the everyday with the life-altering.
Mhm.
You shared that story. Two police officers at the door, their very understated request, "Can we come in? We need to talk with you,"
Yeah.
which immediately preceded the devastating news about your brother's death and then, the subsequent years of caregiving for your mother.
Yeah.
That polite, almost bureaucratic opening, it just stands in such stark contrast to the seismic shift it introduced.
It really does.
It really makes you think about how unprepared we often are for those abrupt intrusions of tragedy into just normal life.
And what's particularly impactful there, I think, is the power of that understatement.
Yes.
The officer's language, it avoids alarm, maybe to manage the initial shock, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that very calmness can create this disorienting gap between the ordinary request and the extraordinary news that follows. It sort of forces the person to bridge that gap with a sudden and often really painful realization.
Exactly. Then there's a text message example. "Hi, Taco Bell. Are you working from home or the office today?"
Right. Totally routine.
A completely routine question for so many of us. But for the person who shared this, the immediate follow-up call from their sister signaled that something was terribly wrong regarding their father. It's like a almost subconscious awareness, maybe?
Yeah, of deviations from the norm.
A quiet alarm bell triggered by an unusual sequence of communication.
That really highlights our sort of innate ability to recognize patterns in how we communicate, especially with close family. When those patterns are disrupted, it can trigger a sense of foreboding, like you said, even before the explicit news actually arrives. It's as if we intuitively understand that certain kinds of news demand a different, maybe more direct form of delivery.
And we saw a similar effect with another text. She asked if I was home, which came right before the news about a grandmother passing.
Mm-hmm.
Again, a seemingly normal question, but perhaps the impersonal nature of a text message for that kind of significant news created a sense of unease, a premonition that something was off.
It's a shift in the medium almost.
Yeah. And then there's just the sheer bluntness of that 7 a.m. phone call. "Dad died."
Wow. Just like that.
Two stark words,
Yeah.
instantly shattering the normalcy of a morning. The lack of any preamble. It just underscores the finality and the raw emotional impact. It leaves absolutely no room for gradual processing. It forces this immediate confrontation with grief.
That directness, "Dad died," it cuts through any potential for misinterpretation, for sure. But it also delivers an immense shock without any buffer at all. It speaks to the gravity of the news, I suppose, where maybe any softening might feel inadequate or even, I don't know, disrespectful.
Yeah, possibly.
It's a stark reminder of how sometimes, in the face of profound loss, simple, direct language carries the most weight, however painful that is.
Okay, so moving on to some of the medical experiences that were shared. It's pretty unsettling how seemingly reassuring or sometimes even dismissive statements from healthcare professionals can end up having such a lasting impact,
Definitely.
sometimes masking serious underlying issues or just invalidating very real suffering.
This really brings to the forefront the inherent power imbalance in that doctor-patient relationship, doesn't it?
It really does.
A doctor's words carry significant weight, and even, well-intentioned attempts to ease anxiety can sometimes have these unintended consequences.
Like the example, we're going to schedule some additional testing, but we don't think it's anything serious.
Right, and for the person who shared that, this preceded news about a kidney stone needing surgery and discovering a potentially cancerous lesion.
So that initial reassurance, while maybe meant to be comforting,
Yeah, probably was.
likely amplified the anxiety when the reality turned out to be quite serious.
Yeah.
It really highlights how that initial framing can strongly influence our emotional response later on.
Absolutely. And then there's the sort of clinical detachment in that pathology report mentioning suspicious worm-like tumors after a hysterectomy,
Oh, wow.
followed by that agonizing 8-week wait for more testing at Johns Hopkins. The ambiguity, just inherent in the word suspicious, combined with that lengthy delay, it must have created immense psychological distress.
8 weeks is a long time to sit with suspicious. What struck you most about these medical scenarios?
Well, what's notable is how easily, it seems, a healthcare provider's attempt to manage a patient's immediate anxiety can inadvertently lead to prolonged and potentially even greater anxiety down the line.
Yeah.
When someone was told they had degenerative disc disease, 4 herniated discs, spinal stenosis, but it shouldn't be causing you that much pain.
Ugh, that's awful.
It's understandable how incredibly invalidating that must have felt. It undermines your own subjective experience, right?
Absolutely.
And it can lead to feelings of being dismissed, maybe even gaslighted by a medical authority. Your lived reality of pain is just contradicted by a perceived expert.
That feeling of just not being heard in a medical setting, it can be so incredibly damaging.
You really can.
And then there's that stark pronouncement. There's no treatment. You just have to get on with it following a diagnosis of chronic pain and fatigue.
Yeah, just get on with it.
The subsequent job loss, the relationship difficulties, the financial strain that person experienced, it just underscores the profound impact of that seemingly dismissive statement. It's actually erased the validity of their suffering and offered, well, no hope or support.
That statement effectively closes the door, doesn't it, on any further exploration or potential avenues for relief. It leaves the individual feeling isolated and completely responsible for managing a condition that's explicitly stated as essentially untreatable. And that can have devastating consequences for their quality of life, their sense of agency.
Yeah.
And perhaps one of the most striking examples we saw was that repeated phrase, "We've never seen this before, and neither has any institution we've contacted," regarding a rare, serious illness since childhood.
Right. Imagine hearing that over and over.
And this culminated in a prognosis of dying young hospice care, only for that person to still be living but with no treatment available. The initial mystery, the lack of answers, compounded by a seemingly definitive but ultimately incorrect prognosis. It just highlights the limits of medical knowledge sometimes and the emotional roller coaster of living with the unknown.
It really underscores the humility that's so important in medicine, I think, acknowledging the boundaries of current understanding.
Right.
Okay, shifting gears now to some deeply troubling stories you shared about betrayal and abuse. It's chilling how innocent-sounding words can be used to manipulate, deceive, and inflict just profound harm.
These examples really lay bare the insidious ways language can be weaponized, used to gain trust and then exploit vulnerability.
Yeah.
That horrific instance, the trusted adult saying, "She'll be home soon, you can come inside and wait for her to come home so you can play together," immediately before an act of molestation.
It's just sickening.
It's a devastating illustration of how easily innocence can be betrayed through carefully chosen, seemingly kind words. The setting, the offer of playtime, it creates this false sense of security that is then just brutally shattered.
It's a violation on so many levels, using the language of care, of reassurance, to mask something so predatory. Then there's the, seemingly innocuous, "I'm going to bed early because I'm just really tired, babe," which were the last words spoken by a fiancé who tragically died due to medical malpractice later that night.
Oh my goodness.
The utter ordinariness of those words, unknowingly, the final communication. It just adds another layer of heartbreak, doesn't it?
The mundane nature of that statement just underscores the unpredictability of life and how easily the ordinary can become extraordinary in retrospect.
Right.
There was no indication of the impending tragedy, making those final words all the more poignant and, well, probably haunting.
And we also heard about a mother's cold response to her child seeking refuge from an abusive father. "I'm not going to save you like that ever again."
Yeah. The profound betrayal inherent in that statement, the abnegation of a parent's fundamental protective role,
Yeah,
it speaks volumes about the lasting emotional scars such words can inflict.
it really
It
does.
creates this deep-seated insecurity and a shattering of trust in the very person who should be a source of safety.
It's a complete reversal of the parent-child bond. And equally devastating, in a different way, is the mother's dismissive, well, honey, there's a lot of hate in the world,
Yeah.
in response to her child expressing a lack of feeling loved.
Ooh.
That casual dismissal of such a fundamental emotional need, it reveals a pattern, maybe, of emotional neglect, where the child's feelings just aren't validated or taken seriously. It sort of teaches the child that their emotional well-being isn't a priority.
And what's also striking is how seemingly random events can be triggered by the most casual remarks, illustrating this weird interconnectedness of events sometimes.
Like the pizza cook statement.
Yeah, got a burnt one up top. Which led to someone getting a free slice, leaving, and then getting into a life-altering car accident.
Wow.
It highlights how even trivial occurrences can set off this chain of unforeseen consequences. It's a stark reminder of that butterfly effect idea, where a tiny initial event can have significant impacts down the line.
It truly makes you consider the ripple effects of even the simplest interactions. And on a much darker note, the phrase, I'll order you a separate Uber, used as a deliberate tactic to isolate someone before an assault.
Yeah, that's chilling.
It reveals the chilling premeditation, the sinister intent they can hide behind seemingly helpful words. The calculated manipulation is just deeply disturbing.
It really underscores how easily trust can be exploited by offering what appears to be a convenience, right?
Right. Seems nice.
The perpetrator isolates the victim, removes potential safeguards, increases their vulnerability. It's a calculated abuse of social norms and, expectations of helpfulness.
And we see this pattern of deception in other relationship dynamics too, don't we?
For sure. Like the repeated empty promise, I promise I'll change, masking ongoing destructive behavior. It just erodes trust over time, creates this cycle of hope and disappointment.
Or the seemingly reasonable excuse, I'm sorry, but I have to leave early, they scheduled me to work, used to sneak away and cheat at a grandfather's funeral.
Yeah, the blatant disrespect and lack of empathy there are just staggering.
It really highlights the chasm between words and actions, doesn't it? And the devastating impact of that kind of dishonesty. And seemingly romantic pronouncements can also be manipulative, like, I think we're soulmates, this feels like destiny.
Right, followed by a profoundly abusive relationship. It speaks to the danger of those too good to be true scenarios, maybe.
Yeah.
And the need for some healthy skepticism when faced with intense, immediate declarations, especially really early in a relationship.
That makes sense.
These grand pronouncements can be a form of love bombing, an attempt to quickly establish intense emotional dependence and control. By creating this sense of unique connection, destiny, the abuser can manipulate their partner's emotions and lower their defenses.
And absolutely chilling is the statement, if I can't assault you verbally, I'm afraid I might get physical.
Wow. That just removes any ambiguity, doesn't it? About the potential for violence.
Yeah.
It creates a climate of fear and intimidation.
Yeah. And then the seemingly social invitation, let's invite the neighbors over for dinner, masking an affair and the subsequent destruction of a marriage.
Betrayal hidden in plain sight, using a completely normal social interaction to facilitate deception.
It's a stark reminder that words can be used to construct these, like, elaborate facades hiding really damaging realities. Now, you also shared examples of, let's say, well-intentioned phrases that inadvertently cause harm, often due to unforeseen contexts or underlying vulnerabilities.
Right. These are the instances where the speaker likely had no malicious intent whatsoever, but their words still had a negative impact, often highlighting societal biases or just triggering personal sensitivities.
Like the seemingly complimentary, have you lost weight, you look good.
Yeah, spoken to someone in the throes of a severe eating disorder. This reinforces the very unhealthy association of thinness with attractiveness and can actually fuel the destructive behaviors of the disorder. It shows how even positive-seeming comments can have a really dark side depending on the recipient's internal struggles.
It really underscores the importance of being mindful, I guess, of the invisible battles others might be fighting.
Definitely. And similarly, the seemingly positive affirmation, you are special and better than other kids.
Sounds nice on the surface.
It does, but it can inadvertently foster a sense of superiority and entitlement, potentially hindering the development of empathy and healthy relationships later on. It sets up this potentially damaging comparison with others.
Right. It can create a kind of narcissistic tendency, maybe, make it
Yeah.
difficult for the child to navigate social situations where they aren't automatically seen as better.
Exactly. And that seemingly lighthearted saying, happy wife, happy life,
Right.
well, it can unfortunately contribute to an imbalance in a marriage
Now,
where one partner's needs are consistently prioritized over the others, leading to resentment, dissatisfaction. It can sort of invalidate the husband's feelings and create this unequal dynamic.
huh. Never quite thought of it that way. Then there's the deliberate lie. My doctor told me that I can't get pregnant.
Yeah, used to manipulate a partner, showcasing how even personal health information can be weaponized in a relationship.
That's a profound breach of trust, isn't it? Using such a sensitive topic for personal gain.
It really is. And the deeply uncomfortable, objectifying comment from a boss during pregnancy. Soon you'll have a baby suckling on your tits.
Ugh, that's just awful.
The crude and invasive nature of that statement and the lasting impact it had on the person's feelings about her body and breastfeeding. It's a stark example of how power dynamics can be abused through language, creating a hostile and demeaning environment.
A blatant disregard for personal boundaries, for professional conduct. Reducing a significant life event to a crude, sexualized comment.
Exactly. And we also heard about the insidious effect of backhanded compliments like, you're pretty for a dark-skinned girl.
Right. That little qualifier. 4.
That 4 immediately diminishes the compliment, doesn't it? It highlights societal biases and implies that beauty for someone with darker skin is somehow unexpected or less valid. It's navigating constant microaggressions.
It speaks to the subtle but persistent ways prejudice can manifest in just everyday language.
And even seemingly encouraging words can backfire, like in the case of, he's gifted and he should be in art school.
Yeah.
While likely meant to be supportive, it created these unrealistic expectations and a sense of failure when those expectations weren't met. It can put immense pressure on someone to conform to a perceived path, stifling their own exploration, leading to self-doubt.
So it underscores the importance of offering encouragement without imposing specific outcomes or creating undue pressure.
I think so. And similarly, that well-intentioned advice given in grad school, the job market's pretty hot right now anyway, led someone to focus solely on coursework,
Okay.
only to graduate into a drastically worsened job market, causing a significant career setback. It highlights how even seemingly sound advice can be rendered irrelevant by external factors and the importance of maybe considering multiple perspectives.
It's a reminder that context is just everything.
Yeah.
And even well-meaning guidance can have unintended negative consequences.
For sure. And finally, the seemingly innocuous, you're so mature for your age.
Oh yeah, hear that a lot.
It can often mask underlying trauma or a forced assumption of adult responsibilities in childhood. It's sort of a subtle acknowledgement of a burden a child shouldn't have to carry, potentially overlooking the lost innocence or the pressures they've faced.
It really speaks to the hidden stories behind seemingly simple observations. And this brings us, I think, to the critical role of timing and context in all of this.
Absolutely. The very same words can carry drastically different meanings, different emotional weight, depending on when, how, and by whom they're delivered.
Yeah, a casual "I'm tired" can mean one thing at the end of a long day,
Sure.
but something entirely different when spoken by a loved one who might be grappling with a hidden illness or a significant emotional burden you don't know about yet.
Right. The nonverbal cues, the existing relationship dynamics, the unspoken understanding between people, all these factors heavily influence how we interpret even the simplest statements.
And many of the experiences you shared touch on that human tendency to replay significant moments, right? To engage in the what-if game.
Oh, yeah. What if I had reacted differently? What if those words had never been spoken? It's a really natural human response, I think, to seek understanding and maybe imagine alternative outcomes.
But as several of your stories illustrated, dwelling excessively on those what-ifs can be emotionally draining and, frankly, unproductive, especially when the responsibility for the negative outcome really lies with the actions of others.
That's a key point. It's important to recognize when rumination becomes a form of self-blame where it just isn't warranted.
Yeah.
Shifting the focus from internal self-recrimination to acknowledging the external factors, acknowledging the actions of others, that can be a really crucial step towards emotional healing and acceptance.
And while many of these narratives understandably highlight the pain devastation caused by these seemingly small phrases, it's also important to acknowledge the remarkable resilience of the human spirit that came through in some stories.
Absolutely. Some of your stories included elements of recovery, finding supportive partners, developing effective coping mechanisms after navigating these really challenging experiences triggered by just a few words.
That capacity for healing and growth, it's a powerful testament to our ability to adapt and find meaning even after significant adversity.
Well said.
So as we kind of conclude this deep dive into the impact of seemingly harmless phrases, it's just crystal clear how potent and often unpredictable the power of language can be.
Indeed. Your collection of experiences has shown us such a wide spectrum, hasn't it? From sudden, life-altering tragedies triggered by understated words,
Yeah.
to subtle, deeply impactful comments that have shaped the course of lives in really profound ways.
And it really prompts reflection, doesn't it? Like consider a seemingly small phrase that you've either spoken or maybe heard that has had a lasting impact on your own life or someone you know.
Hmm.
What was it about that particular combination of words, the specific timing, the unique context that made it so deeply resonant?
That's a powerful question for self-reflection. And it encourages all of us, I think, to maybe cultivate greater awareness in our own communication,
Yeah.
to consider the potential weight our words can carry, even when they seem, inconsequential at the moment.
Thank you so much for sharing these deeply personal stories with us
Yeah.
and allowing us to take this deep dive into the subtle but immense power of language.
It's been really insightful.
It's a powerful reminder, I think, of our shared human experience and just the importance of thoughtful communication.